The fundamental premise of memoir writing is a belief in the restorative power of telling one's truth. The restorative power of telling one's truth. You can find that passage on page 131 of Maureen Murdock's book, Mythmaking, Self-Discovery and the Timeless Art of Memoir, which is about connecting the ability to see the world mythically with the practice of memoir writing. In other words, it's about you writing your mythic memoir. It's about writing your truth, which I believe is always important healing work to do, but even more so when there are voices in the world that might want to silence yours. For me, mythic memoir is also super important for practicing enchantment, which is the Fates and Graces theme this year. My name is Joanna Gardner, and I feel honored and grateful to welcome you to today's MythLit webinar for the myth community to read together and celebrate the field of mythological literature. We also have Stephanie Zachowski with us today. Stephanie and I are the mythologists behind the Fates and Graces team. Steph and I have been working together to cultivate the community of mythologists since 2019. And today we would like to begin by recentering in the values of the Fates and Graces community. In this space, we share ideas, we inspire each other, and we amplify each other's work. We share ideas, we inspire each other, and we amplify each other's work. That's been our vision since day one, and we are more committed to it now than ever before. We also entertain ideas in the manner of the goddess Hestia, with grace and hospitality. That means we try to live the yes and philosophy of conversation. Yes and doesn't mean agreeing with every idea that comes up, but it does mean acknowledging the reality that that idea exists. It means saying, yes, that idea exists, and look, it seems to imply this other one. It means saying, yes, that idea exists, and look, so does its opposite. Yes, that idea exists, and I notice that I'm feeling a strong desire to create something in response to it. Yes, and primes the pump for creativity by bringing many ideas into the space and trusting you to notice the ideas that work best for you, the ideas you find strongest and most compelling, and then to work with them however calls to you. We find this practice just as useful in our personal lives as it is in community gatherings. Your whole self is welcome here. And simply by being here, you are creating the space for everyone else's whole selves to be here too, the same way they are creating space for you. So thank you for co-creating this community. Let's begin today with a chat check-in, as we do. As we'll discuss in a few minutes, mythic memoir writing takes courage. So what we'd like to do today is to crowdsource some words of encouragement. Encouragement, right? Meaning putting courage into ourselves. So what words do you use for yourself when things get tricky, right? One of my phrases for self-encouragement is, you can always postpone freaking out. Right? If I'm going to procrastinate something, why not procrastinate the freaking out and focus on something more useful? So that's what I tell myself. You can always postpone freaking out. So what are some of your words of encouragement? Open up the chat if you haven't already. Maybe let us know where you're joining from. And if you have any words of encouragement that you'd like to share so that the whole community can participate in that feeling of encouragement, please do so. And while the community types, Steph, I'll come to you, wondering if you have any words of self-encouragement that you would like to share with us today.
Yeah, I kind of come at courage sideways. I always like, well, what if it all works out? What if that could happen? What would that look like? So,
What if it all works out? What if, right? Think of the amazing things that could happen. Awesome. So we have, you can always postpone freaking out, and what if it all works out?
We do.
Anything else? Do we have others coming into the
We have
chat?
lots in the chat. We have a lot of courageous folks in the chat. Second
I'm
round.
not surprised knowing this
Yes,
community.
yes. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
From Lisa, all is well. I love that.
All is well.
Patty is BU.
Be you. Couldn't get simpler and couldn't get more profound, right?
From Chris, we have I tell myself and others, I believe in you. You've got this.
I
Oh,
believe in you. You've got this. Oh, I can feel thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I kind of hoped that it would work this way, that everyone sharing encouragement would be encouraging. And I hope you're feeling it too. I definitely feel it. I'm feeling the encouragement. So keep sharing in the chat. Steph, are there any others
There's
that you
lots more. There's lots more. We should write these
let's
down.
do two more. Let's do two more and then we'll go on.
Okay, this is from Zoom user. Not sure who this is, but everything is splendid in this just right moment.
ooh,
Everything is splendid in this just right moment.
Mm.
Beautiful. One more.
Jody, focus on your own passion.
Focus on your own passion.
nice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. So, yeah, I just, again, thank you for your generosity with the words of encouragement. It means a lot to me. And with that, I would love to invite everyone to join Stephanie and myself in officially welcoming Maureen Murdock to Mythlit. Yay, Maureen! Everyone, let's hear it in the chat for Maureen. I'll share a little bit about Maureen's bio. Maureen is a family therapist and the author of the best-selling book, The Heroine's Journey, which explores the rich territory of the feminine psyche and is now published in 23 languages. Maureen teaches memoir writing and is the author of several other books as well, which you can find on her website. And at some point, I'm sure Steph will drop the link to Maureen's website into the chat. And Maureen's latest book, as we've already mentioned, is Mythmaking, Self-Discovery and the Timeless Art of Memoir. And this is the book we're here to celebrate. Mythmaking was published by Shambhala in 2024, and it just so happens that the publication date was exactly 1 year ago today. So today is Mythmaking's first birthday, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's hear it in the chat for Mythmaking on this important, auspicious day in its life. So Maureen, welcome to Mythlit. I would love to offer you the virtual microphone to share anything that you'd like to at this point.
This is so much fun. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but little hearts keep floating up in the screen. I'm going to borrow your not freaking out until later, because I'm freaking out a little bit because trees are being cut right outside my window with large saws. And so I'm hoping that it doesn't distract from our webinar today. But what I usually do when I'm freaking out is focus on Great Mother and Great Spirit and ask for their wisdom. So that's what I'm going to do today. And in terms of welcoming the community, this is such a wonderful community. And thank you for coming out on a Saturday. I was surprised to see people. I can't see your beautiful faces, but I got to see the chat. And there's people from France and from Spain and Canada and all over the United States. So welcome. Just thrilled to be in community with you, particularly at this time where we need community, we need each other. So thank you for the invitation, Joanna and Stephanie. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, we appreciate you being here. So it's a big pile of appreciation at the moment.
great.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I have a few topics of conversation that I'd love to lift into the space for you to speak to. And then just to let everyone know, we're going to do a mythic memoir writing exercise together somewhere around the bottom of the hour. So everyone get your pen and paper ready because you'll need it in just a few minutes. But first we'll have kind of a not exactly interview, more conversation with Maureen. And then after the writing exercise, then we'll have some time for Q&A. And that means, your questions for Maureen. So if you have any thoughts or questions or reflections that you would specifically like us to try to lift up for Maureen in the Q&A part, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a button that has a little thought bubble with a question mark in it. Q&A, it says below it. That's where to put your questions for us so that we can find them when it's time for the Q&A. And you can put those in anytime as we go. Steph, is there anything else I need to cover before we jump in?
Doing great. Let's jump in.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's begin our conversation interview, whatever we want to call this. So to begin, as I mentioned, today is the first birthday of Mythmaking. So once again, happy birthday, happy book birthday to you and to the book, Maureen. And everyone, let's hear it in the chat again. This book has been out in the world for a year now, and it's just at the beginning of its journey, I'm sure. So in honor of this occasion, I would love to hear a little bit about the book's origin story. Maureen, if you'd like to tell us the story of how myth-making came to be.
I'm just cracking up because it feels like I'm taking myth making to kindergarten now and leaving her there to see how she evolves. Anyway, thank you for asking that question. It was fun to think about it. I started teaching memoir at the UCLA Extension Writers Program in the early 90s. And at that time, I had already been teaching a course on the heroine's journey. And so memoir, in a sense, evolved from that. But at the time, there were no memoirs in my local bookstore. There were autobiographies, but not memoirs. Memoirs very different than autobiography. So when I moved up to Santa Barbara to teach in Pacifica's counseling program, I started a course called Myth and Memoir. And so that was kind of the beginning of putting memoir within the lens of myth. And then I was teaching myth and memoir with Dennis Slattery, whom a lot of you know and who has also been on your webinar. So the memoir movement started to explode after Mary Carr wrote Liars Club in '94 and Frank McCourt wrote Angela's Ashes at the same time. And it was almost like people were given permission to start exploring their journey and trying to find meaning out of it. I worked on a book called Unreliable Truth in the early 2000s, looking at the relationship between memoir, memory, and identity, because I was noticing my mother had Alzheimer's at the time, and I was looking at how her identity was changing as her memory was changing. So that book came out in 2003, and the beginning of it, or the first half of it, was about memoir, memory, and identity. And the second half was how to write a memoir. I started working on memoir as contemporary myth maker as I was doing my dissertation at Pacifica in the mythological studies program. So this book, Mythmaking, has been in the works, I'd say, for 8 years. And writing about it and reading 73 memoirs to start to look at the different patterns. Because one of the things I noticed from my students is that they were looking at the same domain of myth in their memoirs. And those domains of myth, as you know, are who am I, what's my tribe, what's my journey, and what's my purpose. So that's the lens that I was starting to look at memoir through. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but not every memoir has a mythic theme, but many, many memoirs do without people really realizing it. So that's the birthday story.
I love it. I love it. And I'm wondering if there's a corollary. Not many memoirs have a mythic theme, and a lot of mythic writing has a little bit of memoir in it as
Yes,
well,
yeah,
right? Like
right.
there's the continuum.
Yeah.
There's room for, you know, for anyone to write wherever they want to on that continuum. You know,
Oh,
as
yeah,
much memoir as you want, as much myth as you want.
right, right. Yeah,
Awesome.
and you're not confined to myth while writing memoir, because a lot of people ask me that, you know,
Mhm.
do I have to choose a myth? Well, no, but you may be drawn to a particular mythic theme.
Mhm.
I noticed when I was writing Unreliable Truth that my relationship with my mother very much paralleled the Demeter Persephone myth. So, and I also began to realize that the Demeter Persephone myth doesn't have to be just between women. The Demeter Persephone myth, I was starting to write about it in terms of my relationship with my son. So, and you know, what is it to move into a descent when the mother cannot do anything to help the maiden or man to rise from the um, underworld, whereas Demeter as an archetype could, but
Mhm.
we're just human.
Like kind of going even deeper into the archetype to even more of the essential.
Right. Yeah. 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 So, in terms of what I was looking at in memoirs was the parent-child relationship, or the sense of loss, or the descent in death, or the fall from grace, or the heroic quest, or home and belonging. All
Mhm.
of these deeply mythic themes.
Absolutely. So, was there anything else you wanted to add about that? I'm thinking of another question.
Go for the question.
Okay, okay. So thinking again, reflecting on the book's birthday, when the book first came out, curious what your vision for the book was right then when it first appeared, and if your vision for it now has changed at all.
Well, the timing of the book birthday was a little tricky because it came within the year of my husband's death. So I was still pretty much in brain fog and grieving. So I was just lucky that I was not only lucky, but relieved that I had finished the book, that I had delivered the book, that it came out. And I was very lucky having friends and the community supporting the birth of the book. My focus had always been and continues to be giving people a new lens to look at their memoirs. Because oftentimes you'll write an entire book and not know what your theme was. And so oftentimes being drawn to a particular mythic theme helps people understand the deeper meaning of the memoir. Because memoir is not just talking about sequentially a life, or it's not a travel log. It's really making meaning out of the particular point of view or particular perspective that you are presenting. So the second part of your question is, what's my vision for the book now? I hope it'll have a long shelf life. And it's already been translated into Spanish, so I hope it'll be translated into other languages as well.
I'm sure it will.
Thank you.
One of the topics that the book addresses is courage, like we've already mentioned today with our words of encouragement. But myth making specifically talks about the courage it takes to tell our truth, right? And there's a passage on page 61 where you wrote, it's the courage to write the selves we may have consigned to the shadow. Right, so this is shadow work. And then in another passage, pages 45 to 46, it talks about the courage to take up space and to defy the forces that tried to silence us. That's not a quote, that's me paraphrasing, but I don't want to impose. But it also talks about how the reward, I'm sorry?
It was a really good paraphrase.
Okay, good. But the book also talks about how the reward for that courage is empowerment, right? Meaning an increase in personal efficacy. And I think what we're talking about is the invitation to well, it's about declining the invitation to live out of fear and instead accepting the invitation to live out of courage, right? Choosing to live from a sense of daring and truth and bravery. And so would love to hear your thoughts about what that looks like. Like, you've seen that happen. What does that look like? You've lived it also. So what does it feel like? Activating courage by writing your truth and then sharing it however it wants to be shared. So what that sense of courage looks like from the outside and what it feels like from within.
Well, how it feels within is fear, because people have, a hard time revealing themselves, and not only to other people, but to themselves, because they might find out their prejudices, and they don't want other people to know their prejudices. So it's really the courage to find your voice, your courage to speak your voice, but find it first, to speak it and allow yourself to realize you're a stand-in for the rest of us. You yourself, in a sense, are not important. What's important is what you discover about yourself within a community of other writers. People find themselves being afraid to write about particular instances in their life that caused themselves pain or caused another person's pain. In writing about it, they gain a new perspective. One of the books that I particularly love about courage is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. She wrote about being raped by a Stanford student. It was in the news several years ago. She had the courage to go to trial and the courage to speak her truth, never realizing how many other people were supporting her around the globe, and that she was, in a sense, a stand in for every other man and woman who had experienced first the rape, but secondly, being discarded by the judicial system. And as a result of her story and the outrage by the community in Northern California, outrage at the judge who only gave the perpetrator 6 weeks, he ended up, the judge ended up being recalled. So she had the courage to tell her story, not realizing it was a much bigger story. And I think that's true about all of us when we write memoir. Um, my own example that I usually tell in terms, excuse me, when I was writing Unreliable Truth, it was around the same time that my mother was dying. And she and I had had a very difficult relationship. And, you know, as a daughter, I wanted the mother to apologize to me. And at her deathbed, I found myself saying to her, I'm so sorry we had such a difficult relationship. I don't know whether she heard me because she was really already passing on. And I was shocked by that. I was shocked by what came out of my heart. I didn't write about it for about 3 years. And in writing about it, it changed my perspective on our relationship. I began to have more compassion for her. So, excuse me. So, having the courage to reveal yourself oftentimes has a great benefit to yourself and to others.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It makes me reflect that the fear is a deceiver, right? The fear lies and says everything's going to be terrible, nobody's going to connect, da, 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 da. And getting past those lies is step one, right? And then the rewards come. And in my experience, I've noticed that when after writing about heavy memories, the memories they feel lighter. It feels easier to have them in my experience, in my past. And after writing about joyful memories, the joyful memories expand. Like the joy expands. It's this like win-win. And I don't know if that's a general principle. That's what I've noticed. Difficulties get easier to carry, and joy gets more fun. So
That's great.
but yeah, I think I'm just such a proponent of this work that you're doing. So I'll just sneak in a quick thank you right there.
Sure. I just want to say one other thing about this. I mean, we're always afraid that we'll be judged for who we are rather than being judged for our writing. I mean, I don't mind being judged for my writing because I can always improve my writing, but I'd prefer not being judged for who I am. And that's where the fear comes in.
And then that brings up your comment, it's not so much about you, it's so like taking out that worry that you're going to be judged for who you are because it's not about you, then that might open up more courage, right?
Yeah, it's not about your ego. It's about the meaning that you've made from this particular slice of life.
That's a good segue into, I'd love to talk a little bit about healing, which is, we're sort of adjacent to that already, but you're a therapist. So you bring that perspective to memoir as well. A keen awareness of memoir's potential for healing. And in chapter 9, chapter 9 says, and this is a quote, "In writing from our pain, we heal gradually, moving from a sense of powerlessness and confusion to a position of wisdom and power." So would love to hear your thoughts about how you've seen that healing look for people, like for people who you've worked with, like what the before and after states might be like for the healing that happens in memoir writing.
Yeah, I think memoir is almost like a middle stage. In therapy, or at least for me as a family therapist, I'm looking at patterns that people repeat over and over and over again in their life. If they start writing about these patterns, there's oftentimes the aha and the ability to choose a change in particular behavior. So the healing comes in agency that, okay, I'm not just stuck with this wounding. I have one way to deal with it. Certainly therapy, but sometimes I find that there's greater healing in writing memoir and then being able to step back and see the larger theme. I'll give you an example. I have a student who's been writing about feeling unmothered, and she's been looking at two generations of women who preceded her, her grandmother and her mother, both of whom were adolescents during the war. Her grandmother during the First World War, her mother during the Second World War. So both of these women didn't know how to be mothers. They were just surviving, trying to survive these two wars. So she's coming to a realization that it wasn't because she was a bad little girl or anything like that. It was cultural. And when we're looking at memoir, we're always looking not only at the personal experience, but the universal experience. How did the culture affect a particular, let's say, wounding? What she has come to in terms of maybe you'd call it a mythic question, which is, what did I come into this life to heal in my family? Which is such a beautiful way of making meaning out of a wounding. So that's a good example.
Yeah, and such a beautiful way of your phrase, healing through agency,
Yeah,
right? Claiming the agency to heal something in her family.
right. Yeah, I want to make one thing really clear. In writing memoir, you don't have to publish it. It's
Mhm.
really about writing and learning what we have, what meaning we can put to the experiences in our lives. So many
Yeah.
students feel like, oh, I want to get this published. Well, it's not easy to get it published, number one. And number two, it's really, I see it as an exercise for healing oneself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have lots more questions that I could ask you, and if we had lots more time, I would ask them. But in the interest of time, I'd like to, we're going to do our writing exercise in just a minute. But first, I would love to offer a chance for you, Maureen, to read anything that you would like to from the book. If there's any passages that you would especially like to share, we would love to hear them.
Okay. I did choose a passage which I think will answer one of the questions that I saw come up on the chat, wanting to know what the 4 domains of myth that I was talking about, which was who am I, who are my people, what's my journey, and what's my purpose. So that'll come up here. What is the story or the narrative that just walked into the room with you? What is the story you tell about yourself, your family, your culture? And what meaning do you make from the story you tell? The story you tell becomes the story you live. Because, as the American memoirist Patricia Hampel explains, quote, because everyone has a memoir, we all have a stake in how such stories are told. For we do not, after all, simply have experience. We are entrusted with it. We must do something, make something with it. I love that quote. Although not every memoir reflects a mythic theme, most memoir writers unconsciously reveal mythic themes in their desire to find meaning in their lives. This is because inquiry lies at the heart of both memoir and mythology, and both arose from a human need for connection. Joseph Campbell proposed 4 domains of myth, which I think also address the tenets of memoir. Who am I? How did I come about? Who are my people, my family? To whom do I belong? Where am I going? How do I make my way? What is my purpose? Where do I fit in within the greater scheme of things? I suspect that one of the reasons memoir is so popular today is that many memoirs address one or more of these questions. Certainly, the first domain, who am I? How did I come about? Is at the core of every memoir. In her memoir, Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love, Dani Shapiro explores the crisis of identity she experienced when she found out through a DNA test at age 54 that her father was not actually her birth father. If the father she grew up with is not her actual father, she wonders, who is she? She is afraid that she has become unknowable, not only to herself, but also to others. She writes, my body wasn't the body I had believed it to be for 54 years. My face wasn't my face. If my body wasn't my body and my face wasn't my face, who was I? Her memoir becomes her origin myth. When the energies present in the older mythical tales are captured in newer contemporary stories, modern readers still experience an archetypally lived event. We access the archetypal through the personal. I'm sure you heard that from Christine Downing over and over. For example, in The Year of Magical Thinking, Joan Didion describes waiting in their apartment for her husband, John, to return from the dead after his sudden heart attack. Her inability to accept the finality of his death recalls Orpheus's vain attempt to reverse the death of his beloved Eurydice and bring her back from Hades. If she could, Didion too would have made the journey to the underworld to reclaim John. The psychologist Carl Jung believed that every society has specific stories that express archetypal themes, such as the death of a loved one. But in each society, the stories emerge from manifestations of already mythic material. The yearning for a figure to embody the archetype remains. The persona changes, while Eurydice embodies the ancient archetype of the dead spouse. Didion's husband, John, embodies the current persona. Another example is the best-selling author Cheryl Strayed, whose chosen surname, Strayed, even reflects one aspect of her self-invention. She wrote Wild not only to document her 1,100 miles solo trek along the Pacific Crest Trail, but also to come to terms with the death of her mother. Her memoir resonated with readers around the world because her story was archetypal. Like Persephone, who was abducted from her mother Demeter into the underworld by Hades, the loss of her mother and the pain of separation plunged Strayed into a deep descent. 4 years later, her journey from the Mojave Desert through California and Oregon to Washington ultimately healed her.
Thank you. What pages
Go
was that on?
I started on page 4 and read up to 7.
4 to 7, everyone. That was pages 4 to 7.
Yeah.
Thank you. That is, I want to give back some words you shared. The story you tell becomes the story you live, right? The story you tell becomes the story you live. Thank you so much, Maureen. And that is kind of a perfect segue into our writing exercise. So would love to invite everyone to pick up their pen and paper. And I want to note, so myth making includes writing exercises. Every chapter ends with writing exercises, and all of those exercises are also gathered into one section at the very end of the book, which is it's a great resource for teachers. They're just all right there. But today we're going to do a different writing exercise. So the invitation is to gather your pen and paper and shake your arms out a little bit, wiggle in your seat, or if you're standing, wherever you are, just let a little bit of movement come in and allow the surface that's supporting you to support you a little bit more, whether it's the chair that's holding you up, or the floor that's holding you up, or the sofa that's holding you up, whatever it is that's supporting you right now, let it support you just a little bit more. And if you feel comfortable, close your eyes or just lower your gaze, soften your gaze, and then breathe deeply in and out. Again, in and out. One more time, breathe in and out. And as you breathe, think of a cherished memory, a memory you have that always makes you smile. It doesn't have to be a big moment, but it can be. It can be the tiniest possible moment, just some memory that every time it comes up, a smile comes to your face. Let that memory play in your mind and give yourself the gift of enjoying it all over again. Let yourself smile with it. Now open your eyes and write the memory down. Write everything you can about it. When was it? Where was it? What was the weather? Who was there? What happened? Make sure to include some sensory details such as smells, flavors, maybe textures, temperatures, and write it all down as quickly as you can without editing. Just keep writing forward and get as much down as you can. I'll keep an eye on the clock and we'll write for 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, I know that wasn't very much time, but we are running out of time with our webinar. So wrap up the thought that you're on. Then look over what you wrote and underline any words or phrases that have special energy for you. And let yourself smile again. And if you like, please feel free to type anything that you wrote into the chat that you'd like to share, whether that's a single word or a phrase or a sentence or two, if there's something that that you could share so we could all experience a little bit of what you just experienced. And I just want to point out that this memory that you just wrote belongs to you. It is yours. It's a resource you can call on anytime you need it. Anytime you need to counteract feelings like frustration or overwhelm, anything that feels like it blocks your ability to see clearly and respond creatively. You have this memory and you have lots more like it. So it is 10:50. I would love to open up for one or two questions at this point. And I see that we have a bunch already, so we won't be able to get to anything like every single one of them. But Steph, let's start with one and see how we're doing, and if we have time, we'll do two. How about that?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think we have some interesting questions around myth that have piqued my curiosity as well. So I am going to kind of combine a couple here. We have Johanna and Patricia. Um, and first off, Johanna says, Maureen, thank you for your generosity and sharing with us today. And I would like to ask how you define myth. I am curious how this word may be used as a writer myself. I am sensitive to call any experience that I am writing about as myth, as it seems myth is extraordinary, and I'm not sure what I experience is as such. And then we have quite a few questions about, you know, if our stories are mythic, how do we incorporate that myth? Like, how do we do that? So there's some myth questions around defining that. So,
I, I think of myth as story, a story with an archetypal theme. And some of those themes are parent-child relationship, as I mentioned before, fall from grace, journey, loss, reconstitution. So, you know, the mythos means plot. So what is the story when I read before, what is the story that you walked in the room with? What's been the plot of your life?
interesting, interesting. So it's not necessarily tying it to a specific myth as much as living into a pattern or an archetype and identifying that pattern.
Yeah, yeah. And most people won't be able to identify it until after they've written their memoir.
Mm. Mm-hmm. So it's a looking back exercise rather than a.
Yeah, it's saying, okay, this is one particular lens. There's lots of different lenses in which to look at your story. But, you know, as you write, a person might think, oh, what I'm really writing about is an initiation.
Mm.
You know, so maybe this is about when I was 13 or when I was 18, and what did I learn along the way in that initiation? I mean, there's a lot of memoirs about the mother-daughter relationship.
Mm-hmm.
One I was really intrigued by, I'm forgetting the name right now, but she actually wove in the Narcissus and the fact that she had handed her mother a bunch of Narcissus before her mother went to work at this one particular bar called the Underground. And her mother ended up being shot. She was killed. And so she blamed herself for handing her the vehicle of her downfall, which of course was not true. But she wrote the memoir and then she realized I wasn't responsible. But she had carried that since she was 19. So people find like the journey, a lot of people find some comparison to the Odyssey. So I think it has to do with people's interest in myth. You know, the question is, what myth are you living?
Mm-hmm. So it's less of setting out to write this story into this myth and more of allowing the myth to arrive in the story itself.
Yeah, and just using it as a lens. And I really want to be clear, it might not, you don't need to write a mythic memoir. It's just another lens to think of when you're writing, particularly in this community that knows different myths and, and knows different cultural myths. That's what's really exciting, how people can see their own life through a particular cultural myth.
Yes. Yeah. That interconnectedness. Oh, that's lovely. Do we have time for one more question? No?
If we go really quick, can we do a quick one?
um, okay, I'm looking over here. You spoke a bit about memory early on, so I think this is interesting how people are speaking of large gaps and kind of trouble with recalling and things of that nature. Could you like speak a bit to that aspect of memory and to that tension in memoir between fiction and truth telling?
That's a whole webinar. Um, um, my everybody has gaps. Everyone does. One thing you can do is write what you remember. Oftentimes that'll generate what you hadn't remembered, but also to ask people in your life, is this accurate or did I make this up? I actually had that situation this past week with a student. She realized that she had made it up because she had heard the story over and over and over again. But a way to do that is listen to the music of the era in which you're writing, look at movies in the era of which you're writing, think about the food, think about the colors in your life, use all of your sensory input to try to activate your memory. That's my quick answer.
That was brilliant. That was quick and brilliant. I love it. And it sounds so fun. It sounds just so evocative to kind of time travel
Yeah,
in order to do the writing.
and ask family and friends and see what their memory is.
Well, and theirs are going to be different. I know that.
Totally, totally. And that speaks to unreliable truth. The reason that my book is titled Unreliable Truth is memoir, you're not writing factual truth sequentially. You're writing your emotional truth.
Yeah. So we are getting close to time. We're gonna probably take a couple minutes over our planned time, but that's okay. To wrap up the conversation, I would love to share one last quote. And Steph, could we do the? Oh, you're doing it already. Stu's already doing it. So here's another quote from the book. Maureen, if you would read this for us, we would love to hear your voice.
Okay, memoir writing is healing because it provides the potential to experience and transform emotions attached to past wounds that were never integrated before.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Everyone, let's hear it in the chat. Let's hear virtual applause and all those heart emojis for Maureen and the work that she did to bring this book into the world so that we can all benefit from her wisdom. And if there is a word or a phrase that you'll carry with you today after we close, would love to invite you to put that in the chat as well. Again, so everyone can share in what your experience is and you can share in everyone else's. For more about Maureen's work, you can find her. Here's kind of the details. Your next steps, take a look at this book if you haven't already and let everyone else know about it. Maureen is going to be at a conference called the Once and Future Goddess Conference at Opus Archives, and you can find out more about that at opusarchives.org. She will also be teaching a course, I think again, called Writing Down the Soul with Pacifica's Extension Program. That website is here too as well, extension.pacifica.edu. And rumor has it she might be involved in the Women's Writing Guild Summer Conference. Location and other details TBD, but go to iwwg.org for signing up for their newsletter. And Maureen's website, of course, is maureenmurdock.com. So take a screenshot of this slide if you'd like this information, and I bet Steph is posting things in the chat as well. Actually, Steph, could we go back for 1 second more? I just wanted to check in with Maureen. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this slide about how best to
I think
contact you or anything else?
Yeah, you've covered everything. I appreciate that.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, now, Steph, let's go on to the next slide. So the next Mythlit webinar is going to be in about a month, 4 weeks from today, and we're going to be hosting Maggie Mendenhall to discuss her book, Vox Eurydice, The Ascent of the Female Rescuer in German Language Opera. It's very excited for this conversation, and like all Mythlit webinars, it is free. You can register at fatesandgraces.com/webinars, and we hope to see you there. If you would like to support Mythlit, the invitation is open to join our Patreon. Stephanie and I want to extend a super special thank you to the Fates and Graces patrons whose monthly support is making it possible right now for this webinar to be happening and for it to be free for the community. Our patrons are invited to quarterly Zoom check-ins around the solstices and the equinoxes, where we catch up on what we're all working on, what we're reading, what's on our minds, and it's just a really nice kind of community touch point. Our next check-in will be for the spring equinox on March 23rd at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you would like to join that circle and support this work, you can visit the link right here, patreon.com/join/Fates and Graces. And again, thank you so much to our patrons. And here is how to connect with the Fates and Graces. You can sign up for our email list on our website, which is fatesandgraces.com. We are in the process of moving away from Facebook and onto Blue Sky, which is a ton of fun. So if you're not on Blue Sky yet, come on over. The water's fine. And you can find us there. Our handle is @FatesandGraces. That's the blue butterfly is Blue Sky. We're also on Instagram and LinkedIn. And Stephanie's and my personal websites are here on the slide as well. I'm not going to spell them out because there's just way too many letters. But again, you can screenshot, and I bet Steph is dropping things into the chat. And that is just about it for today. In closing, I would love to remind you that your voice is vital. Your wisdom, your story, your lessons learned. As you work with your voice in whatever way you feel called to do, I wish you all the blessings that we have discussed today, courage, healing, and the deep knowledge that you matter and your story matters. So keep reading, keep writing, and keep practicing enchantment, and we will see you at the next Mythlit webinar.
Thank you.